Thank you. First of all, thank you all for coming. It's a delight to see old friends, and I think even more delightful to make some new ones, which I hope to do. Could I congratulate Maria Teresa Fiorio and Pietro Marani on the exhibition. Having organised exhibitions, I know what it takes, and an exhibition of this scale is an extraordinary achievement, and the catalogue as well, and, believe it or not, this convenio. Anyone organising a convenio knows the difficulty that they face. The office, all Pietro's assistants and so on, who've been immensely patient. And the difficulty is they have to deal with people like me, which is not much fun. And one of the guarantees, I thought, was that people organised conferences always ended up with grey hair. As you see, Pietro has come through this unscathed. The lecture, you probably know the theory of 6 degrees of connection, that you can, in theory, be connected with anyone else on the earth by 6 degrees of connection. With Leonardo, however diverse the discipline is, whether we're looking at anatomy, geology, optics, engineering, or whatever, I think you can say that you can get from one area to another, often with one connection, and at the most with 2. There are always these extraordinary links of unity, and the chains of connection are multiple. It's very rare that there is just one single link from one discipline to another. And the links often are non-linear, which makes the Leonardo in the Age of Computers particularly interesting if we can create non-linear structures for non-linear ways of interrogating his legacy, which I'm currently engaged with. And of course, in the Polytechnic, we only need make one move. We can go across all Leonardo's disciplines within this one organisation. So that's the background to the talk. What I'm going to be doing is looking at a particular, not exactly a corner, but a particular aspect of how we can make these links between one areas of Leonardo's highly specialised activity and his activity as a painter, above all with the Mona Lisa, and in this case via fossils, and we will see how we get there. Doing it via the Codex Leicester, I'm currently working with Don Amico Lorenza on an edition of the Codex Leicester, a print edition and a digital edition, and we're actually meeting with Oxford University Press this coming week to think about ways of navigating through the manuscript in a very new way through all the resources, the transcription, the translation, the facsimile, the commentary. I've done a complete paraphrase in modern language as well, because the translation often is very difficult. Anyway, this is one of my starting points, the Codex Leicester, particularly concerned with water in the body of the earth. In the top left-hand corner, you have the 18th century binding. Of course, it was taken out of its binding when Armand Hammer was owning it. And the slide below, the image below, is of the outer sheets. The outer few sheets concerned with astronomy, or more particularly the passage of light from the sun, moon, and earth. Somewhat exceptional in the context of it, but since the moon had seas, reflective seas in Leonardo's mind, you can see why water in the body of the earth and water in the body of the moon are again similar things, although one is optical and the other is physical. There are always these extraordinary links with Leonardo. And I'm going to the Mona Lisa. This is the link I will be making. 2 rather different images. The one on the left, you won't see that if you go to the Louvre. This is digitally restored by Pascal Cotte, using algorithms for taking off dirty varnish and so on. So it's not what I would do in Photoshop. It's not just a crude color transposition, but it's very useful in my sense because it does clarify to a remarkable degree both the space of the picture, how the body of the woman and the body of the earth relate spatially, but it also highlights the passages of water, which are going to be absolutely crucial to my presentation. So I shall be using details from Pascal's Cot digitally restored image, not saying this is what it looked like originally, but saying it does give us something which the painting in the Louvre currently doesn't in its current state and in its current viewing conditions. I'm going to be splitting it into 4 sections, sort of 4 movements, as it were, an excursus on how the eye sees, which is slightly different from the other bits, but it gives an indication as to how one of the optical topics in the Codex Leicester can refract through, literally refract through into the Mona Lisa. Water in the body of the earth, the ancient history of the body of the earth, and the more general theme, the microcosm. How the eye sees. This relates to the famous discussion in the Codex Leicester, early on in the Codex Leicester, of the lumen cinereum, the ashen light in the new moon. The fact that, as you can see, if you ever get a clear night, the way in which the dark portion of the moon with the little new crescent has this glimmer, this ashen light, this lumen cinereum. Leonardo shows the positions of the moon, earth, and sun, which causes this particular phenomenon, and argues that the lumen cinereum comes from the reflection of earth light off the seas, onto the seas of the sun. So we are onto the seas of the moon. So we are giving earth light to the moon, just as moonlight comes to us. So it's part, as we know, of his optical interest in percussione, in rebound, in how an object in shadow will pick up refracted, rebounded light according to the laws of percussione. On the top, the theoretical demonstration in manuscript C of 3 balls, as it were, suspended in a box and illuminated by rebounded light. The National Gallery of the Rocks, Virgin of the Rocks, with the glimmers of light underneath the hand of the Virgin and the chin of the angel, and similarly the chin of the Mona Lisa. This is very characteristic of Leonardo's pictorial practice and absolutely not characteristic of earlier Florentine practice as a whole. But more than this, and this is about how the eye sees, and it's a very remarkable move, he says we don't just deal with exterior optics, we deal with interior perception, with optics of vision in the eye, with perception, with cognition. And he explains this varying field, that's the field of the dark field, which varies in its intensity. This varying field is generated because that part of the field which borders on the luminous part of the moon, in comparison to such brightness, shows itself darker than it is. And that part above, where it looks like a piece of luminous circle of uniform width, is generated because here the moon, being brighter than the medium or field in which it is located, in comparison to such darkness, shows itself on that border more luminous than it is. That's to say, it's a subjective effect. It's an effect of our perception, this edge contrast where something which is dark looks brighter by juxtaposition, particularly at its immediate edge. And on this miraculous little drawing, he manages with pen hatching somehow to suggest the way in which the upper border of the shadow is lighter against, subjectively lighter against that. Very remarkable. I don't know of any European scientist who had said we don't just need to think about the physical phenomenon, we also need to analyze our perception of it. It comes ultimately, I think, from Ibn al-Hazan. It comes from Islamic or Arabic optics, ultimately, but it is a very remarkable move nonetheless. And if we look at the paintings, this is, Vincent will recognize this, as I think most of you will, the shoulder of the Virgin and St. Anne in the Louvre painting. You can see the way in which he sets light against dark, dark against light, and in the bottom left-hand corner, he actually adds around the fringe of the form a slightly lighter tone to get that optical separation. He does it a lot in his paintings. Chardin does it, Seurat does it, some of the other Dutch artists do it, but it's relatively rare to find these enhanced edge contrast which Leonardo uses. Anyway, that's one link in the Codex Leicester. He also discusses why the air is blue. So there are these optical come pictorial concerns appear in the Codex Leicester somewhat unexpectedly. But to the main theme, water in the body of the earth. This is the main subject of the Codex Leicester, as long recognized. A series of rather quick-fire proposizioni, conclusioni, casi. I started the edition thinking we'd be able to differentiate between propositions, proposizioni, conclusioni, and casi, but he uses them more or less interchangeably. They have a slightly different flavor, but he's trying to get a vocabulary that works. After all, this was always discussed in Latin previously. The top one I've included because it's got the list of books, one of many alternative lists of books. He works from basic principles of the elements and water, through water in the body of the earth, how it behaves, to canalization, to engineering. It basically goes from theory to practice, but he never settles upon an absolutely definitive order. Here you see their proposizioni listed at the top. The second page down, we've got conclusioni in the margin, written there in the margin. But then on these other two sheets, on these 8 sheets, are 730 conclusions about water and its beds. And on these 7 sheets are 657 conclusions about water and its beds. These are conclusioni, but they're also casi and so on. And he goes back through the manuscript. You can see 3 lines down where the S has been emphasized. He reads back and he says, that's a casi, a caso, or a conclusione. So he emphasizes the capital, and he then goes back and counts them all to see how many he's got. It's an extraordinary, difficult way of doing it, and often the casi in different pages are very erratic in what they cover and their particular content. And we tend to see them as rather different when in fact they're all heavily linked. There are various techniques he's using in the Codex Leicester for looking at water, and I'd like to begin by emphasizing experiment. Experiment, the marginal illustrations here, the one at the top is labeled sperientia or speriencia, and consists of a glass-sided tank. He says, have the ceramicist, the expert in ceramics, make this with glass sides. And above at the top he has a board or an upright with a bocca, with a space, and he then puts water in this glass-sided tank, and you can see what's happening. You can see at the bottom he's got essentially the same setup with the bocca, the rectangular or square opening. In both these he's blowing wind through. He's looking at the effect of wind on the surface of the water, but of course you can put water through. And it seems to me that the miraculous series at Windsor, where he assembles this great synthetic drawing, this is not an observational drawing, it's a synthetic drawing from multiple observations, that in fact the bocca is not one out in the landscape somewhere, it's in his laboratory, it's in his studio, and it's precisely done using the experimental tank, which he illustrates and says, get the ceramicist to make this in the Codex Leicester. We can obviously see, and I've made this point a number of times, and it needn't be belabored, but this vortex pattern, the turbulence, the chaotic pattern, as we now know, carries through heavily into Leonardo. The Lader's wig, which is a mixture of highly artificial variations upon the natural curling, the natural vortex structure, with these spouts of free hair coming out almost like water and then dribbling out down the side of the wig, and the famous sheet in which he says, note how the movement of hair is like the curling of hair is like the movement of water. I won't read out the whole text, it's famous enough. And of course in the Mona Lisa, the scarf, the diaphanous scarf, the cascades of hair, and these wonderful little rivulets of gathered silk at the neck. The picture, though a static portrait, is full of flow, it's full of flux, it's full of the rhythms of fluids in motion. Alongside that observation, and we can chart in some cases very carefully what Leonardo was looking at. Miraculously, this tiny, tiny drawing of the of the River Adda and the Martesana Canal near the Villa Melzi of that period, we can, as has been shown, we can look over Leonardo's shoulder and see what he is looking at. This ferry has been replaced by a spectacularly ugly road bridge now. Anyway, we can look over his shoulder, both with the help of an 18th century map in the top left. We can see the Martesana, we can see the river, and there's a little tiny subsidiary channel beside the main channel. And going into the little three-arch bridge, tiny little detail, going into the three-arch bridge, which I show there in the bottom left, and then you can go, and it's still there today, this little three-arch bridge, now with a dry water course. I imagine it gets full during times of flood. The two people sunbathing were rather puzzled as to why I should be photographing them. But, it's wonderful, isn't it, just to be able to see over Leonardo's shoulder and think he looked so intensively. He looked, and it's something which he does absolutely remorselessly. And of course, on a bigger scale, his practical engagement with canalization, the disastrous, the failed scheme, which is very, very well documented in terms of the resources given to Leonardo for diverting the Arno around Pisa. The key fossa, the key ditch, is actually I'll walk over, hold on. That is the one which is going to divert the Arno down to the other canal and ultimately to the sea. That is the location of it. There's been a lot of misinterpretation of these maps. This is the double-page map in the Madrid Codex, and the much grander scheme, the much grander civic scheme for a canal, this great arching canal going via Prato in Pistoia to bypass the non-navigable section of the Arno. This would rejoin the Arno east of Pisa, so this is not connected with the war at all. Amazing map. All Leonardo's maps live. We're used to maps being inert. With Leonardo, he can't draw the surface of the body of the Earth without it living. I've called this the Jackson Pollock of the map maker's art. It's extraordinary free, but it's scaled. There's a scale along the bottom, and it's pricked through for transfer. So this is part of a measured system, and it isn't simply an impressionistic map. The route he took is actually a sensible one, as proved by the modern motorway engineers. Going from Florence, you don't go along near the Arno, you don't go through all the very difficult, geologically difficult terrain. You go via Prato in Pistoia. You can drive that. The Prato and Pistoia road then goes on and joins the Genoa road further north. Leonardo would have taken it down from the Alto Pascio area down into one of the lakes which existed, and then back into the navigable section of the river. This is a practical scheme. He'd seen schemes of this size in Milan, so he knew what could be accomplished. And there's a lovely note. We don't think of Leonardo as a logistics person, but this lovely note says the Arte della Lana, who would invest in it, they would be put the capital into the project, makes the canal, and it takes the income. The canal passing through Prato Pistoia, emptying into the lake. It will be without locks. Presumably the levels meant that it would flow without locks, and be more durable and give more income from the places through which it passes. He envisages each of the cities would also draw off income. This canal cannot be excavated for less than four denarii per braccio, paying each labourer the rate of 4 soldi per day. And this canal is to be made between the middle of March and the middle of June, because the peasants, being free from their ordinary work, will be able to be hired, and the days are long, and the heat does not prove exhausting. I think that's a lovely quote, isn't it, Leonardo, thinking about this. I'm not quite sure why the peasants are unemployed during those months, if anybody's got an idea as to why they suddenly become free in the spring, and maybe we can work out what Leonardo is up to there. And these are two other maps showing the same great arching canal, this great It looks like a long way, but it does make sense geologically. And on the map on the left, you've got two lakes, the two large bodies of water which are now drained. They're part of the floodplain of the Arno. And in a much more detailed way, this hands-on experience of water in the body of the earth, the drawings for the two weirs in the Mugnoni and Arno, which are eroding the bank so badly. On the left, we can see the two weirs in the bottom left, just little details of them, and then he's, as it were, zoomed in, pulled out this detail, zoomed in on it, and the weirs, which are the cascade, the impetus of the current, the impeto through the middle, causes one of these very characteristic back vortices, but then spirals on and then excavates an even longer damage. This is labeled left to right, so somebody else is meant to read this. It's clearly for the Florentine authorities, and he's saying this is why this, however much often you build up that embankment, it's going to be eroded. And we don't know his solution, but it would have been to make the water behave in a more orderly manner, to cajole the water to be more helpful to the interest of human beings. This takes us on to the ancient history of the body of the earth, because looking at the canals, this hands-on experience of surveying the Arno, looking at its bed, looking at how it moves through the earth, this revolutionized his notions as to how the body of the earth had been in ancient times. And I'm going back to that map, and this quotation, just one of many where he's analysing what's happening in the earth with the water cutting through the mountains, cutting through the plains. Golfolina in ancient times was joined with Montalbano in the form of a very high bank. Golfolina is the great rock which you can still go and inspect. It no longer blocks the Arno. This dammed up that river in such a way that before emptying itself into the sea, which was afterward at the foot of that rock, it composed two large lakes, the first of which is where now the city of Florence is seen flourishing, together with Prato and Pistoia. And Montalbano continued the remaining part of the bank until where Serravalle is now located. In the upper part of the Valdarno above, as far as Arezzo, a second lake was generated, which emptied into its waters into the above-mentioned lake, enclosed about where we now see Girone, and it occupied all the mentioned upper valley for a space of 40 miles in length. What you have to do here is to fill in the side with Arezzo, the Arezzo side of that plain, and the left-hand side with its two lakes, fill them all in with water. And you've got the one of, not just total, but it's got one of the prehistoric setups in the Arno Valley. This map it needs to be reorientated, it needs to be rotated about, Arezzo is on the left, Perugia on the right, so you need to tilt it not quite through 90 degrees, but close to it to make geographical sense of it. Here again, working out floodplains, working out where the water would naturally be and where the big lake at Arezzo would have been. The current floodplain, he is saying, is where the lighter blue is, with the river moving through, but originally the whole of that valley would be full of one of these vast lakes. And in looking at this, he begins to see strata of what we call fossils. He doesn't use the words fossils, he uses the words Niki, or he talks about the particular shells. So my title is anachronistic, but it signals to us what he's looking at. The mud was precipitated in which shells lived, and which was raised in stages corresponding to the floods of the Arno, and turbid it poured into that sea. And from time to time the bed of the sea was raised, and it occasioned those shells in stages, as is shown in the cutting of Colle Gonzoli, which has its slopes cut by the river Arno. The river is cutting through these slopes, which consumes its footings, and in this cutting the aforesaid levels of shells are manifestly visible in the bluish mud, and various marine things are also found there. And there are other accounts of these strata, including ones in the Danube and Rhine, which he must have had reported by people who he quizzed about these things. And on the same page later on, there's one of his characteristic polemics of the foolishness and simple-mindedness of those who require that these animals should be carried by the deluge to these places far from the sea. He marshals a whole range of arguments. How another sect of ignoramuses asserts that nature or the heavens created them in these places through celestial influences, i.e. astrological creations. We have disappointingly few drawings by Leonardo of what we would call fossils, but that is one of them. We know that there's lovely records, memorandum of peasants bringing him a sack of such things, knowing Leonardo was obviously known to be slightly weird and was interested in these old things, and presumably the peasants could get a few lire for satisfying Leonardo's curiosity. And that's fairly local, but it extends to these vast visions that even the Mediterranean was and is going to be transformed. This from the Codice Atlantico I'm showing you, first of all, in the upper right in its original orientation, and to make it slightly easier, I've rotated it with the Straits of Gibraltar on the left, a rather tucked in Italy in the middle of it, but just to give you the orientation of this little sketch map. He says at one point to the Codice Atlantico, make this in sand. He's actually going to do a model of the Mediterranean in sand to see if this theory is right. Astonishing move. Whether it worked or not is almost immaterial, but the idea of this experimental prova is very extraordinary. The marine shores, he writes, move continuously toward the middle of the sea and drive away from its original place. Only the lowest part of the Mediterranean will remain as the bed and course of the Nile, the greatest river which pours into that sea. And it will be joined by all its nearby rivers, which previously used to pour their waters into that sea, as is seen in the Po, with its nearby rivers does, which once poured into the sea that was enclosed between the Apennines and the German Alps and was united to the Adriatic Sea. An astonishing vision, and predicting the future, the Straits of Gibraltar will gradually erode and open into the ocean, and the Mediterranean will become a river bed, essentially an extension of the Nile. Not again important in a way if it's right or not. The strength and magnificence of the vision is what particularly fascinates me. It is an awesome translation of local observations onto this scale, and even bigger, of course, into the whole crust of the earth, the whole substance of the earth. Since the earth is mixed and full of ramifications of the waters within itself, and somewhere it is rare and elsewhere it is dense, somewhere soil and elsewhere rock, this earth does not have its own center of sphericity nor center of gravity, i.e. independent center of gravity, and especially because it has waters and earth above the sphere of the water, which lend their weight to it as if it were the weight of the earth. And as these vast changes occur, and as we can see here, collapses of the crust into the hollow core of the earth, so the relative centers of gravity of the earth and water shift, and there are great upheavals of mountains. They then become eroded, the center of gravity alters again. So you've got this seesawing of the centers of gravity of the earth and the sphere of water, causing immense uplifts, even bigger than the Mediterranean. Again, a very, very, very extraordinary vision. Characteristically, in the lowest sheet, Leonardo turns it into a demonstration of transformational geometry, abstracting the phenomenon from its fairly diagrammatic indications of the crust of the earth into the principle which can be acted on geometrically. He can turn the movement of the centers of gravity into a precise geometrical, not so much an arithmetical, a precise geometrical analysis. And of course the Mona Lisa, and I've done this before, so I'm also apologetic in doing it again, but I think it does still work pretty well. In ancient times, there were two large lakes, the first of which is where now the city of Florence is seen flourishing together with Prato and Pistoia. Above here, as far as Arezzo, a second lake was generated, which emptied its waters into the above-mentioned lake, and it occupied all the above-mentioned upper valley for the space of 40 miles in length. Now, I'm not saying this is an image of the, this is what Leonardo is portraying here. This is not a literal image of the prehistoric Arno Valley. He doesn't do that. I get sent probably about once every 6 months somebody saying, I've identified the landscape in the Mona Lisa. It's a synthetic landscape. It's remaking nature. This is what Leonardo does. But the principle is exactly the one he's learned from the Florentine Canal, exactly what he's speculating on in the Codex Leicester from 1506 onwards. So this corresponds with the extended life of this, extended execution of this portrait. And we can imagine what's going to happen. The upper lake is going to break, isn't it? Come through, it's going to hit the lower lake, and the river on the left, on the right of the Mona Lisa with the little bridge won't be enough. So the previously dried up watercourse to beside Mona Lisa's right shoulder is going to be inundated. There's going to be a great pressure of water coming through that, what clearly is a dried up watercourse, which is now being used as a road or a passage of some sort. Then just finally, and this is a well-known theme, so I won't push it on all that much, the microcosm, the idea of the body of the earth and the body of the person, in this case a woman, as essentially analogous in terms of rocks, in terms of blood, in terms of breathing. This is the one in the Codex Leicester, and it's much more dynamic than the one in manuscript A, the other comparable passage which he'd written previously, and it deals with eruptions and so on. I'll just pick up, the soul of the world is in the fire which is infused throughout the earth. The seat of the vegetative soul are the fires which breathe in various places of the earth through baths and mines of sulfur, and in Vulcano, the island, and Mount Etna in Sicily, and in many other places. He's rather unclear as to how the middle of the earth is both full of water and fire, but these are ideas he's working through. And of course, once we start looking at the anatomy and we start looking at Arno and Mugnone, you can see the visual parallels. He knows that meandering flow is inefficient. You want straight channels. Meandering flow causes silting up, and as he shows in the little inset diagram which relates to the dissection of the Vecchio, the old man, the centenarian in Florence, he explains that the old man's vessels, which are tortuous, get silted up. In particular, he notes the vessel around the house, the heart is silted up. So this is water engineering applied to the old man's body and to understanding his sweet death, as Leonardo called it. And the branching systems, the body shown as an albero delle vene, with the attached organs, a tree of the vessels, not veins, but vessels. Sketched out and not developed. You may think, well, this occurs on a sheet with architecture. It does, but he's dealing with transparency, isn't he? He's dealing with see-through structures. So the stairs for the peasants or for the servants and the masters are shown in a tower in a see-through form. And then right at the bottom of the sheet on the left-hand side, he's got, Pietro Marani has written about this, he's got some of these famous columns which are trunks of trees with their branches lopped off. You know, it's extraordinary, isn't it? You think there are 3 different things on that sheet, and they're not. There are just 1 degree of separation between each of these. And of course, it transfers into Leonardo's case into the desire to turn it into geometry, arguing in I'll paraphrase it in anachronistic terms, that at each stage in an efficient branching system, at each stage of the branching, the total cross-sectional area of the branches will equal that of the added cross-sectional areas at each level and of the main tube. Manuscript M, you see the tree there with its designated cross-sections. He knows trees are more irregular than this. They have contingencies, they have accidente, they have occurrences, which means there is no tree in nature, but this is the tree according to dynamic law of the flow of sap, and the wonderful coralline lung looking like a coral, which bifurcates meticulously according to this rule of the cross-sectional areas to create non-turbulent flow. Always with Leonardo, let no one read my principles who is not a mathematician. He is always and it's mainly geometry. He knows about algebra, but disliked algebra and didn't use it. Too symbolic. He's not much good at arithmetic, but the geometry is just amazing. And ultimately, this wonderful drawing at Windsor I call The Great Lady, this great double sheet drawing, is one of irrigation. This is the body of the woman as a system of irrigation for passing fluids, for passing air, for passing blood, for passing urine, and ultimately for the purposes of reproduction. It's the Codex Leicester in visual form in the human body, effectively. And if we then go back to the Mona Lisa, we've got what I think you can almost call two preparatory drawings for Mona Lisa. Not preparatory drawings in the sense in which you and I are used to thinking of them, but these are conceptual preparatory drawings for the concept of the portrait. The area with the lakes, original lakes at Florence and Arezzo, and the irrigation of the woman's body. I think it's been intuitively understood over the years, even by people who haven't rationalized it and certainly don't know the Codex Leicester and the two lakes, etc., that one of the fundamental principles of the Mona Lisa is this dialogue between the two bodies, between the landscape and the woman. And I'll end with a quote from Walter Pater in the Renaissance in 1873, who seems to me to have got it poetically by sheer intuition without knowing anything about Leonardo's manuscripts. I think it's a very beautiful passage, and I make no apology for finishing with it. The presence that rose thus so strangely beside the waters is expressive of what in the ways of 1,000 years men had come to desire. Hers is the head upon which all the ends of the worlds are come. She is older than the rocks among which she sits. Like the vampire, she has been dead many times and learned the secrets of the grave, and has been a diver in deep seas and keeps their fallen day about her. The fancy of perpetual life, sweeping together 10,000 experiences, is an old one, and modern philosophy has conceived the idea of humanity as wrought upon by and summing up in itself all the modes of thought and life. Certainly Lady Lisa might stand as the embodiment of the old fancy, the symbol of a modern idea. Thank you.